Hi everyone, I'm Allie with the Potomac Bead Company, and I'm going to show you today how to do this leather and silk wrap bracelet. And it can be a multi-strand bracelet. You can do it once. I'm going to be showing you featuring our new O beads that are Czech glass bead that we have. The color that is used here in the example is the green vitriol matted. And the color I'm going to be using is the Rosaline AB color. In addition to your O beads, you're going to need some leather. I'm using 0.5 leather, and both colors I've done is a brown color. And I'm going to be feeding the O beads onto that leather. And for that, you're going to need double your wrist plus an extra 6 inches. So if your wrist is 6 inches, you're going to need 12 plus 6. You're going to need right about 18 inches total of that leather. You're additionally going to need some silk cording. You could use other cording too as well if you want, and that's what's going to be running down the center and holding the O beads. And for this one here, I use the brown size 8, and this one I'm going to be using the pink size 8 with my pink beads. In addition to that, I'm closing it off with a cup button, one of our Czech cup buttons, and I'm using the silver crystal color of that. Tool-wise, it's really simple. All you need is a wire cutters or scissors and some super glue. And this is what we're going to use in order to make our leather and silk bracelet here with the O beads. To start my bracelet, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my leather into that 18-inch piece, so that way I get a 6-inch bracelet, and I'm going to double it over. I'm going to allow the ends to meet right at the end, and then I'm going to tie just an overhand knot, making a loop big enough that my button can fit through. I don't want it too big, but I also don't want it too small that the button won't fit through. So you're going to double your leather and then just do a nice little overhand knot here. And pull tightly to get that started. And make sure once you're done with that, before you go any further, that your cup button does fit through there rather nicely. After we're done with the leather, you're going to set that aside and we're going to go into the silk cording. The silk cording comes on a card, at least the one that we sell. It's the Griffin beading silk. And you're going to take the whole entire thing off the card. The needle is at the very, very tip of the card, but I want to get to the very end. So you take the whole entire thread off, and this is true for any time you're working with the silk cording. It's nice because it already has that needle attached. We're actually not going to be using it for this purpose. So if you do have a piece that doesn't have a needle, don't fear, you don't need it. I'm taking the whole thing off my card, and the silk cording will stretch a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my cording through my card. I'm going to double the card over and make a little trough there. I'm going to be pulling my silk from the needle end down towards the end. And what I want to make sure is that I'm not pulling right here where the needle attaches. So I'm going to go a little bit further down, and you won't use this whole thing. You'll use about 2/3 of it. And I'm going to pull the cording using some pressure through this card. So I'm pulling and yanking as I go. And I'm pulling the cording through, and what that's doing is it's going to stretch the cording. Some people will wet their cording and hang some weight on it so that it fully stretches. If I'm doing a pearl knot, I'll do this multiple times so that way I don't get a lot of extra space in between the pearls. But when I'm doing something like this, where it doesn't really matter if it stretches just a little tiny bit, I'm not going to worry about it too much. If you do want to get those kinks out, you can also iron it. Or again, put some water on it, stretch it out, and let it dry. But you're going to be using that whole piece of silk cording. That way you don't waste the end with the needle, that you can use it for another project if you want to do that as well. You want to make sure not to pull it through your hands or you will get rope burn on your fingertips. So you want to make sure to use that card in order to pull it through. Our button we're going to add at the very, very end of our project. And how we're going to begin this project right now is to attach our silk cording from the very, very end onto our leather. To do so, all I'm going to do, again, simple knots. I'm just going to tie a nice overhand knot around the leather. So I'm going around both pieces of my leather. I'm tying a nice knot, giving a nice tight pull. I'm going to switch hands and tie again so that way I have a square knot there. I do have a little bit of a tail just so that way I have something nice that I can hold on to as I'm doing this. But eventually we are going to glue when we get done the project and cut off that extra tail, so that will not be there. After I have this set up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed all my all of my O's onto my cording. If you don't have O's, you can use 6 O seed beads. Anything will really work. It's just going to depend on the size of your leather that you're able to use once you're able to get that string on, because the beads that you're using need to fit on the leather, not the silk cord. So once you have your O beads, you're going to actually thread them onto your cording. If you're doing about a 6.5 inch wrist, you want to thread about 4 inches of O beads on. It's better to have more than enough than not enough. So you're just going to drop these right onto the leather and then drop them down right next to your loop and your silk cording. Again, 4 inches of O beads on both sides of the cording. So you're doing 8 inches total, 4 on each side. So I'm just showing as I'm stringing that I'm putting those O beads on to one strand right now, and I've got about 1.5 inches, and I'm going to keep going again until I get 4 inches. Then what I'm going to do is just tie a knot at the end to hold that on, and I'll flip over and I'll do the same thing on the other side. Once you have the 4 inches onto your cording, you're going to just slide those up right next to your knot, and they will move around your cording a little bit. If you have too many, not enough, you can always figure that out too as you're doing your weave, and you can add some or take some away. When I did this one, I actually took some beads off. So 4 inches is a little bit conservative, but that way you have plenty of room to work. So I'm going to slide all of those O beads down towards the knots at the end, away from my loop, and I'm just going to start with 2 O beads right at the top. And what I'm going to do is start my weave. This weave is based on a figure 8, that you're going to be figure 8 and doing over and under each cord from one cord to the other. So initially, whatever side my cording is closest to, I'm going to push that O up. I'm going to go to the other side here. I'm going to go over my leather, under that leather, and scoot to the other side. I am going to push those up then. At the start, you just kind of need to push them up just so you make sure that they're nice and tight to the top. I'm going to go over the leather at the bottom strand here and over the top. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push a bead up in place on the bottom strand, and that's going to get pushed right there next to the previous one. On the other side, after the O's are always going to be a set of the silk cording, so I'm going to go over the leather, under the leather, push an O up, and kind of give a little tug to hold that one in place. If your O drops down as you're working on it, so see I'm missing an O here next to my cording, you just kind of push one up in place and make it stay. Go over to the other side here, over and under. I find it's easiest just to move my leather cording rather than my long piece of silk to go over, under, push a bead down, into place, come to the other side, go over and under, and get ready to push a bead up on the other side. Again, always going over and then under the cording to the other side. And if you notice there's not a bead in place next to your silk, you want to add that one in and push it up in place as well. Come over the cording and go under the cording and over to the other side. So it's getting this over-under look with my glass beads right in the middle there. You can see it better here. It's almost like a fishtail. And I have my bead then on the other side, and you're just picking up your leather, letting the bead drop down into place. And then adding the silk cording over and under the leather cording to get it right in place. You're just going to pull nice and tight. And we're going to continue by pushing a bead into place and going over and under and getting that little weave. So just to show the project as I'm working it, again, we're going over and under. I usually move up a section of my O beads and kind of have them laying there in place. And I'm going over and under my cording, going to the next O bead in line, going over and under, pushing a bead in place on the next one, over, and then under. And just repeating that over under pattern. As you're going to, you want to make sure to take your hands and just kind of move your beads up along the line, especially down here where if you're doing it fast like this, where you're kind of moving the beads up in the line. They tend to get spread out a little bit. So you want to make sure you kind of push them up in place as you're doing your over and under rotation. And just continue on the whole length of your project to get that nice, again, fishtailed look that the O's are giving you with the cording in between. Now that I have it done the entire length of my project, I do have about an inch left over on each side that I'm going to just trim off when I trim off my knots. But to end my silk cording, what I'm going to do is, since I'm at the end of one of my O rotations here, I'm going to wrap it around both pieces of leather. Use my fingers there to hold a loop open. I'm going to pull the cording through it, making a knot. This knot I'm going to put right up next to my last bead. It's a half hitch knot, in case you want to know what kind of knot. I'm just going to give a nice tight pull to get that right there and ready to go. At this point, I am going to go in, just so my beads don't shift at all. And I'm going to go in with my super glue glue, and I'm going to glue the start there. And I'm also going to glue my finish. I'm going to let that dry, holding it up or putting it on a surface that it won't stick to. If you lay it down on your bead mat, it might stick to it, so just be aware of that. Once this is dry, I'm going to trim it and I'll show you how I add the clasp. So to add the clasp, all I'm going to do, because I have extra cording, is I'm going to cut off those knots that I have that were just stopping my beads from the ends. If you want to, you can also use bead stoppers for that. I'm going to take off all my extra O's. Put those back in my tube then. And right now what I'm going to concentrate on is putting that button clasp on the bracelet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cording and I'm going to go up through the back of my button, coming out through the front. So as I went to put the cup button on, I realized that the leather that I grabbed off the shelf is actually 1mm leather, so that will work with the O's as well, but it's not going to work with my cup buttons. So I just went to the wall and grabbed one of our antique brass pewter buttons, and all you're going to do is put it through the shank of the button, bring it down towards your project, so it's going to sit right over the project, and then I'm going to go to the back and I'm going to tie the two ends of my leather together. So it's nice and simple. You don't need to overthink it. I'm just going to tie those two ends. If you want to, you can leave these as fringe and put some beads on the end. I'm going to tie 2 knots nice and tight. And then I'm going to go in again with my glue, and I'm going to glue right over that leather. And give a nice dab of glue. Let that dry a little bit. Pull the leather a little bit tighter while the glue is drying. And then once it is dry, we'll cut it down and trim it. And I like to use wire cutters rather than scissors with my leather. I like the nice snip that it gets. And there you have your bracelet, and the loop just goes right over the button and you'll have it completed. When you're looking at the bracelet, like I said, it looks nice and like fish scales almost as you're looking at them and working with them. The different colors you can really play up with the different patterns. You can use 6 O seed beads as well with the 0.5 leather, as well as the 1mm leather. So you can use either of those when you're working on it. Or you can pick up some silver beads, put those on as well, and just have fun doing this fishtail pattern with your leather and silk cording. Hopefully you guys have learned a little technique today. You probably have some of these materials already, some scraps that you can use to make with it. If not, you can check out the Potomac Bead Company online at potomacbeads.com. Go to our locations page and visit one of our stores to shop to get your materials. Or you can go to thebeadco.com if you don't live near any of our locations. Check out the rest of our YouTube videos as well. We'll keep you informed on some new products as well as some new techniques to use while you're working with the different beads that we get from around the world. So thanks a lot for watching.